Hi, this is Center-Right Federation, and today we will be exposing the Black Lives Matter movement and the reverse racism agenda. See, now the Reds, the communists, they do all these things, such if you guys watch my video, the war on white people, they do these things because it's for their divide and conquer strategy, provoke minority resentment, and use minorities as a tool to destabilize society, attack all Western civilization, and attack Republican idealism. And today we'll be discussing that in this video. And here I have two good men by the name of Luis Marrero and Vladivostok 3701 here to explain it to all of you.
Revolutionary like I'm Huey Newton. Che Guevara when them bullets start shooting.
Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hi, this is Luis Marrero, and welcome to my new series called Exposed, where I expose movements, political figures, and ideologies with hidden secrets waiting to be revealed. In this video, I will be discussing one of the most popular movements in social media. I am referring to the Black Lives Matter community, a national phenomenon in the United States in which African Americans campaign against supposed violence towards black people. This movement began in 2013 with the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter on social media after the acquittal of neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin. Black Lives Matter became nationally recognized for its street demonstrations following the 2014 death of Michael Brown, resulting to protests and riots in Ferguson and later New York City. The American media are portraying them as revolutionaries fighting against injustice. Members of the movement describe themselves as defending their loved ones from racial hatred and that their actions are justified.
Call it an overreaction. Call it a riot, a violent protest. Call it everything but justified. Ask us to be polite, to stay calm, to voice grief with respect while our brothers' bodies are laid out on the street, sounding the alarm.
The community is forming an illusion to promote themselves as comparable to the civil rights movement. But are they really fighting injustice, or are they doing the exact opposite? In MLK's letter from Birmingham Jail, Martin Luther King Jr. stated,
"In any nonviolent campaign there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive, negotiation, self-purification, and direct action."
Now, according to MLK, these are the steps that all nonviolent campaigns should follow. To discover the truth, we need to use the 4 steps and compare them to the Black Lives Matter movement. To start off, the first step is to collect facts to determine whether injustice exists. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a racial divide in the American South. Blacks and whites attended different schools, visited different restaurants, stores, movie theaters, etc. It was a common sight for Africans to be brutally murdered, such as the case of Emmett Till. There were even terrorist attacks towards black people, which include the 1963 bombing of the Baptist Church in Birmingham. These horrific events is what led Martin Luther King Jr. to establish the civil rights movement. In the case of the Black Lives Matter movement, it was caused as a result of the death of Trayvon Martin. The mainstream media has portrayed Martin as a young, defenseless good boy who was simply just buying a bag of Skittles and watermelon juice. They also portrayed George Zimmerman as a racist that killed an African-American teen simply for the color of his skin. But the truth is, there's vast amounts of evidence to prove that George Zimmerman defended himself. We can look at the countless times Trayvon Martin was suspended from school, one for drug possession, burglary, and even attacked a bus driver. He was such a troublemaker that even his mom kicked him out of her house, according to the text message he made 3 months before his death. Not to mention that Skittles and watermelon juice are the main ingredients for a drug-like syrup called lean, which is a mixture of candy, juice or soda, and cough syrup, which there is proof that he was aware of this beverage. Now, if you look at Zimmerman, you can tell that he is not white, but half Hispanic and Jewish. And looking at the crime scene, you can tell that George Zimmerman was beaten up badly, while Martin, according to the autopsy report, the only injuries besides the bullet wound were scratch marks on his fist, which occurred when Trayvon was smashing George's head against the concrete. And finally, Zimmerman did not say coon, but a slang term, goon, which means hooligan or thug. There's also evidence that disproves the media's portrayal of Michael Brown and Freddie Gray. There's countless videos and photos to prove that the gentle giant was a violent human being. There's also recordings that show him stealing a box of cigars and beating the hell out of the store manager, minutes before the encounter with Darren Wilson. And according to both the autopsy and eyewitnesses, Michael Brown was shot in close range. Even people who witnessed the event claim that Brown did not put his hands up and that Wilson defended himself. On the case of Freddie Gray, it is a fact that 3 out of the 6 police officers that arrested Gray were black. Looking at the evidence, we can tell that the case of Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, and Freddie Gray are not examples of modern-day lynchings. It is true that we still have to deal with racial terrorism, such as the Charleston shooting, but unlike the 1950s, the felon was arrested and was charged with a guilty verdict. Now the second step that all non-violent campaigns should follow is negotiation. MLK quoted, for example, of negotiation.
Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community. In these negotiating sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as the promise to remove the humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, Reverend Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights agreed to call a moratorium on any type of demonstration.
If you look at the Black Lives Matter movement, instead of negotiation to end the supposed racial violence, they interrupted political rallies.
No, we are going to let you on the mic. Okay.
And instead of explaining how to prevent police brutality, BLM blamed whiteness as the cause of injustice.
Is there anything you'd like to ask me about being white?
Yeah, I'd love to know what you plan to do now that you understand your whiteness a little better to dismantle it.
Which contradicts MLK's belief that nobody should be judged by the color of their skin, but by their personality. The third step that all non-violent campaigns should follow is self-purification. King stated,
"We were not unmindful of the difficulties involved. So we decided to go through a process of self-purification. We started having workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked ourselves the questions. Are you able to accept blows without retaliating? And are you able to endure the ordeals of jail?"
Unlike the civil rights movement, Black Lives Matter does not perform self-purification. They riot, loot, beat up, and even go far as killing innocent people to promote their agenda.
Until the police ain't there no more, and that's when we should act. When them motherfuckers are by themselves, that's when we should start fucking them up. Like they do us, when there's a bunch of them niggas taking one of us out, that's how we should roll up. Since we already roll up in gangs anyway, might as well be 6 or 7 black motherfuckers, see that white person, and lynch their ass. Let's turn the table.
German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche had warned about this. He quoted,
He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if thou gaze long into an abyss, the abyss will also gaze into thee.
Nietzsche is 100% correct. The Black Lives Matter community has went too far in promoting their racial hatred propaganda. So much so that they became racist themselves. They demonize white culture.
Okay, first, sociology lesson, little Lucy. Black people cannot appropriate white culture. We can only assimilate white culture because white culture is the dominant culture in white supremacy, capitalism, patriarchy, imperialism. Girl, how you don't know that, Lucy?
Claim that blacks are oppressed by white privilege, which doesn't exist, and argue that only white people can be racist.
Reverse racism is not a thing. I've been bullied, beaten up, and called all sorts of names in my lifetime, and you're gonna tell me that's not racism? Whoa, that sounds awful. I'm sorry, none of that stuff is okay. But those are examples of racial prejudice, not racism.
The final step that all non-violent campaigns should follow is direct action. In MLK's letter, he stated,
As the weeks and months unfolded, we realized that we were the victims of a broken promise. The signs remained. As in so many experiences of the past, we were confronted with blasted hopes, and a dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon us. So we had no alternative except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as a means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community.
instead of direct action, the Black Lives Matter movement caused violence and crime. They destroyed cities such as Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland. Martin Luther King Jr. had mentioned about this in his letter from Birmingham Jail.
In no sense do I advocate evading or defying the law, as would the rabid segregationists. That would lead to anarchy.
Indeed, the BLM community is advocating for anarchy. They are threatening and killing the enforcers of law. They follow the teachings of Marx.
He talked about redistribution of wealth and economic justice. Redistribution of wealth and economic justice. Redistribution of wealth and economic justice.
And they are sponsored by anarcho-communist groups such as Occupy Wall Street. The Civil Rights Movement and Black Lives Matter have nothing in common. Martin Luther King Jr.'s goal was to build a society in which all men, both white and black, will be guaranteed undeniable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. While the Black Lives Matter community main goal is to divide America, promote inequality, and establish a governless state. This is Luis Morero signing off. And oh yeah, all lives matter.
White privilege. It's a term that you are probably familiar with. If you happen to be a white person living in the current year, you may have heard the term shrieked at you by Marxist sociology professors and blue-haired cat ladies, and many of you have probably been told to check your white privilege, usually while going about your business in a public space.
I want to say something to you, white people. You are not actively dismantling white supremacy and checking your privilege. You are not doing it right.
You're a fucking white man, so unless you are here to dismantle your privilege, please find somewhere else to go.
But if you don't habitually browse Reddit or sip the social justice Kool-Aid, you may find the term superfluous or even a bit silly. But what if I told you that there is an entire school of thought which posits that white privilege and white supremacy are the basis for the entire Western legal system. What if I told you that this school of thought has influenced some of the most powerful people in the world today? Well, strap yourselves in, folks. We're about to venture down the abominable snake hole that is critical race theory. In order to conduct a thorough analysis of critical race theory, we have to go all the way back to Frankfurt, Germany, during the 1920s. This was when the Institute for Social Research, commonly known as the Frankfurt School, was founded. The Frankfurt School was a research organization composed of Marxist intellectuals who were disenfranchised with the mainstream Marxist notion that the capitalist system would eventually be overthrown violently by the proletariat. Instead, the Frankfurt theorists sought to bring about communist revolution by implementing social change and dismantling the social structures which they believed propagated capitalism. One of the leaders of the Frankfurt School was a man named Max Horkheimer. In 1937, Horkheimer published one of the seminal texts of the Frankfurt School entitled Traditional versus Critical Theory. In this work, Horkheimer outlined what he called critical theory, distinguishing it from traditional theory, which according to Horkheimer referred to any kind of discipline whose aim was to discern objective truth via the scientific method. Critical theory, on the other hand, was not concerned with finding truth at all, but rather with criticizing things. In Horkheimer's own words, the goal of critical theory was to liberate human beings from the circumstances that enslave them. Now, what are these enslaving circumstances that critical theory is supposed to liberate us from? Well, just about every pillar of Western civilization can be a target of critical theory. The nation, the family, religion, capitalism, education, music, film, objectivity, truth, anything. Prominent Frankfurt School theorists such as Herbert Marcuse, Theodor Adorno, and Max Horkheimer, and many others, used critical theory as a tool to bludgeon the intellectual foundation of Western civilization in order to pave the way for communist revolution. Critical theory was incredibly influential to the emergence of the New Left during the 1960s and 1970s. Intellectuals of the New Left, who were influenced by the Frankfurt School theories, employed critical theory to develop entire ideological frameworks to further their Marxist agendas. Feminists such as Betty Friedan drew heavily on the works of Herbert Marcuse in her book The Feminine Mystique, which was a major work of second-wave feminism. Many legal scholars also employed critical theory to create what has come to be known as critical legal studies, whose goal was essentially to recreate the entire Western legal system along Marxist principles. Critical legal studies was highly influential to this guy. His name is Derrick Albert Bell Jr., and he is noted for being the very first black tenured professor at Harvard Law School. Now, to get an idea of just what Derrick Bell was all about, let's watch this clip of him discussing his life's mission.
Why do you do it? And she said, Derrick, I'm an old lady. I live to harass white folks. And the marvelous thing about her, the way those neighborhoods, she lived near whites who were supportive of her. So she wasn't talking, it wasn't a racial thing, but she knew that those people who were oppressing her were white. She knew that she didn't have their power, she didn't have their money, she certainly didn't have their guns. But she saw her life as given in trouble, being on the case all the time. And I've accepted that as my motto. I live to harass white folks. So those at Harvard and some of the other places need to be on guard.
That's right. Saying that you like to harass white people in this day and age is about as innocuous as saying that you hate Adolf Hitler or Kenny G. But if you had a white guy say that he likes to harass black folks, well, he's gonna bring the full wrath of the SPLC and the NAACP down upon him. That's the double standard of social justice in action. Now, Derrick Bell is also known for being an advocate for civil rights and for staging numerous protests at Harvard. One of Bell's most notable protests occurred in 1986, when he sat in his office for 5 days to protest Harvard's failure to hire 2 black professors, even though the university admitted that their teaching and scholarship was substandard. A prestigious university like Harvard should know that refusing to grant people preferential treatment because of their skin color is racist. You're never going to achieve cultural enrichment by holding people to a universal standard. Come on, Harvard, it's 1986. Get with the program. Now, when he wasn't rent-seeking on behalf of incompetent professors, Derrick Bell was heavily engaged in the civil rights movement. In particular, Bell wrote in his 1973 book, Race, Racism, and American Law, that the gains of civil rights had stalled, and that blacks in America were not getting the gibs that they were entitled to. Bell claimed that the American social order and legal system served to propagate white supremacy, and that this was the reason blacks could not achieve parity with whites. In order to properly critique the racist legal system, Bell applied critical legal studies to the issue of race, to create a new offshoot of critical theory, which he called critical race theory. Now, critical race theorists do not believe that the law is an objective code of conduct enforced to make society safe and tolerable for all, but rather they believe that the law was written in order to enforce white supremacist power structures at the expense of blacks and other minorities. According to Derrick Bell, critical race theory was an experientially grounded, oppositionally expressed, and transformatively aspirational concern with race and other socially constructed hierarchies. In plain English, critical race theory is concerned with criticizing the white supremacist social order to pave the way for racial emancipation, much like how Horkheimer's vision of critical theory was to criticize the bourgeoisie social order to pave the way for proletariat emancipation. What both of these theories have in common is that they are more concerned with hammering out a particular ideological agenda than with seeking objective truth through rational scientific inquiry. Now, critical race theory has grown significantly since Derrick Bell, and today consists of a large body of legal scholars and intellectuals, all intent on subverting and dismantling the existing legal order for their own ideological ends. There are several core tenets that critical race theorists adhere to, and these are as follows. Intersectionality. One of the most influential contemporary scholars of critical race theory is Kimberly Williams Crenshaw, who coined the term intersectionality in 1989. Intersectionality posits that the various cultural and social categories, such as race, sex, orientation, ability, and religion, are inextricably linked to a given person's experiences with oppression. Crenshaw argued that being a black woman gives her a unique experience with oppression because being black and being a woman often reinforced each other. In other words, the more of a special snowflake you are, the more unique an experience you have with white supremacist power structures. If you're a boring old straight white man, you aren't oppressed, so critical race theorists don't need to hear from you. But if you're a transsexual Muslim Samoan with 14 headmates and a PCP addiction, well, your experiences are infinitely more insightful in terms of understanding systems of oppression. This incredibly subjective and unscientific view of social relationships has since spawned a large number of offshoot fields of critical race theory, including critical race feminism, Latino critical race studies, also known as Lat Crit, also Asian Crit, Desi Crit, and Tribal Crit. I wonder what sort of wacky studies they'll come up with next. Maybe Downs Crit, Dead Crit, or even Heroin Junkie Crit. The possibilities are truly endless. Storytelling. In keeping with the subjective and anecdotal nature of critical race theory, telling stories, or as they say, naming one's reality, has become a core tenet of this ideology. Rather than providing evidence or data, critical race theorists rely on storytelling to demonstrate their oppression. For these people, the plural of anecdote is data. Patricia Williams, a professor at Columbia University and noted critical race theorist, recounts a number of such stories in her book, The Rooster's Egg. One of these stories involves her bemoaning the fact that white dolls were being sold in the store for $3.99, but black dolls were only being sold for $1.99. My God, it must be a real struggle to cope with such brutal, intolerant racism. The reason why the black dolls are cheaper can't possibly have anything to do with supply and demand or the cost of production. It has to be because of white privilege. Now, grab a juice box and pull up your carpet squares, folks, because I have a story of my own that I wish to share. Once upon a time, there were a bunch of Marxists who tried to co-opt the legal system to push their own ideological agendas. Eventually, the people got sick of their shit, so they banded together and threw all of the Marxists out of fucking helicopters, and everybody lived happily ever after. The end. Microaggressions. For critical race theorists who see acts of racist discrimination at every turn, including band-aids and hotel shampoo, it's no surprise that they would interpret seemingly innocuous acts as being oppressive. Critical race theorist Richard Delgado describes microaggressions as being one of those many sudden, stunning, or dispiriting transactions that mar the days of women and folks of color, like water dripping on sandstone. They can be thought of as small acts of racism, consciously or unconsciously perpetrated, welling up from the assumptions about racial matters most of us absorb from the cultural heritage in which we come of age in the United States. That's right, folks. According to Delgado, you can commit racist aggressions without even knowing it. Everything from spreading your legs on the train to asking somebody about their ethnicity can be perceived as a microaggression. If you're a white male, it's best to just not do anything or say anything at all around people of color, lest they report you to human resources for hate speech. And denial of objectivity. According to critical race theorists, the notion that law applies objectively to all people is utter nonsense. Emory University professor Dorothy Brown writes that critical race theory seeks to highlight the ways in which the law is not neutral and objective, but designed to support white supremacy and the subordination of people of color. And in the Derrick Bell Reader, Delgado writes that critical race theory challenges the notion that law is applied with detached impartiality. Rather, law is seen as concealing the partisan exercise of power and acting as an instrument of subordination and an agent for silencing minority voices. That's right, Quantavius. The reason that you're currently serving 13 consecutive life sentences is not because you raped and murdered all those people. No, it's because the legal system is trying to silence your voice. So now we should all have an understanding of just what critical race theory is all about. Critical race theorists argue that white privilege is normal and is maintained by the law, and that the goal of this theory is to achieve emancipation by rooting out all the hidden racist aspects of our justice system. Much like the critical theory outlined by Max Horkheimer in the 1930s, critical race theory relies on a subjective analysis of individual experiences and storytelling to highlight alleged systems of oppression. So no doubt some of you are asking, well, why does critical race theory matter? It's important to be cognizant of critical race theory because it has a tremendous influence on many aspects of our culture. For example, the rhetoric characteristic of the Black Lives Matter movement draws heavily on critical race theory. One of the biggest grievances from the movement is that police unfairly prosecute black people, and that the justice system is inherently racist. This is despite the fact that white criminals are statistically more likely to be killed by the police than black criminals, and the fact that black people commit much more violent crime in the United States than whites and Asians. Yet, this has not stopped these vibrant Kangs and Kwangs from portraying the justice system as an institution of white supremacy. And many critical race theorists have also supported Black Lives Matters, like David Theo Goldberg, who said that the movement characterizes the universalizing politics implied in the notion of post-racial America, and the phrase "all lives matter" reflects a view of racial dismissal, ignoring, and denial. Isn't it interesting that even though blacks murder each other at 10 times the rate that whites murder blacks, if you don't sheepishly chant "Black Lives Matter," then according to people like David Goldberg, you're the one who is in denial.
Yeah, that seems legit, you clown.
And it should also go without saying that critical race theory has a significant foothold in academia. Most black studies departments throughout America are dominated by professors who adhere to this ridiculous ideology. Universities, such as Arizona State, offer courses such as U.S. race theory and the problem of whiteness. And the University of Wisconsin and many other schools regularly publish papers and host talks that argue in favor of a critical race theory perspective in higher education. Many of the recent peaceful demonstrations at Mizzou and Oberlin College over institutional racism no doubt have been influenced by the detritus ideas peddled by critical race theorists. And even the 44th President of the United States of America, Barack Hussein Obama, was known to attend lectures by David Bell at Harvard Law School, so it's very likely that the president has been influenced by this nonsense to some degree. There is even a video of Obama giving a warm introduction and embracing Mr. Bell.
This scholarship has opened up new vistas and new horizons and changed the standards of what legal writing is about. Open up your hearts and your minds to the words of Professor Derrick Bell.
Now imagine the outrage if the president spoke kindly of someone whose mission was to harass black people, or, God forbid, Jews. They would probably be impeached and have their name chiseled onto the SPLC Hall of Shame. Yet, if the president embraces somebody who claims that their mission is to harass white people, they get a Nobel Prize. God bless America. And now this brings me to my final point, which concerns a term that is the subject of a great deal of controversy nowadays. And that term is cultural Marxism. Loosely defined, cultural Marxism is an ideological framework that views culture as the main cause of social and economic inequalities, in that in order to bring about the equality Elysium that so many leftist intellectuals fantasize about, the existing culture must be fundamentally altered. Essentially, it refers to the ideological legacy left by Antonio Gramsci, Bayesian anthropology, the Frankfurt School theorists, and Derrick Bell, all of whom command a considerable influence in many cultural institutions today. The term cultural Marxism is subject to such controversy precisely due to the fact that the people who are most influenced by it will deny its existence. These people can't see the forest through the trees. Writers of such dismal publications, such as The Guardian, claim that cultural Marxism is a conspiracy theory cooked up by a bunch of kooky right-wingers who spend too much time browsing Stormfront and fapping to Chinese cartoons. But a conspiracy theory it most certainly is not. When you examine the far-reaching influence of such schools of thought as critical race theory or Bayesian anthropology, it becomes obvious that Marxist ideologies are firmly entrenched in many academic disciplines. You would be hard-pressed to find even one university that hasn't been paused by such degeneracy. If you value objective academic inquiry, if you believe that an idea should be judged on its merits and not by the skin color of the individual proposing it, then it is important to see the ideological heritage of this degenerate ideology so that it may be uprooted and destroyed. But hell, maybe I'm just blinded by my white privilege.
You're fucking a white male! So? You're a white man!
And now for the sponsor of the Black Lives Matter movement. Here he is.
We must spill the blood of the white devils. The time has come to reverse the table and exterminate the white race once and for all. We will see to it that all white people are lynched. We will destroy America and kill all the whiteys. Resistance is futile, white man. We will have our revenge.